And Mark, are we live?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to call this meeting to order, and we will open in prayer and do the pledge. And I've asked Darrell Bruner if he would open us in prayer.
Dear Heavenly Father, we are so blessed in so many ways. And even through all these challenges that we're going through day in and day out, Lord, we are hopefully hanging together. Just a great example is the 2C program that Gene and others are leading, and for our kids, and what's most important than our kids and our next generation. So thank you for this council, for the leadership of the mayor and the city of Nampa, of wonderful citizens in this place that we live, that we could just show openly our love for you and our love for our citizens, and just help us in this meeting today to make the wise and good decisions for our citizens. In thy name, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Darrell, thank you. Let's do roll call. Vegas?
Here.
Bruner?
Here.
Mucci? Here. Levi? Haverfield?
Here.
Bauer? So as we get started this morning, I want to start and say, Sandy, if you speak a little bit later, we could barely hear you. So I want to make sure that if you do want to speak, that we can hear you when you speak. As we get started this morning, the new business item that we're going to be discussing is to approve participation in the Governor's Public Safety Initiative and the property tax relief proposal. We did discuss this at a previous date and had determined not to participate in this particular program. But this week on Tuesday, the Department of Treasury, the Office of Investigator General, the OIG, and released some new information that we received on Tuesday, and then I received some additional information yesterday that has caused us to say we need to come back and rediscuss this. I think we owe it to our citizens. I think our citizens hopefully know that we are very interested in taxes, in providing relief and caring for our citizens. And we take this decision very seriously, and I felt it was important that we come back and reconsider it and have a discussion. So I've asked our treasurer, finance director, both, yes, Gracine is going to share with us the items that impacted him, that he shared with us the first time around, and that have changed, that he's going to share. But I want to quickly share something that philosophically, as I was pondering this, I thought about, because some of the discussion has been concerning the actual CARES Act, and then the Treasury guidance, and how the initial language said one thing and then the guidance came forward, and that's a little bit different, and what we just received. And what I think we all know is in the legislative process, for example, when a piece of legislation is passed, there's a rules side of that. What is the intent? And at the federal level, it's my understanding that the Treasury was initially involved in writing the language for the CARES Act, but since that time, there have been adjustments and amendments that have been made, and actually further clarification that's come forth. And that isn't in opposition to, it's in clarification of. And as I really pondered this, I felt that that was important to understand, that the Treasury is a governing body, and the OIG, and that they have been releasing additional clarification. They have done that and provided additional guidance and allowed us to use funds at the state for broadband, for education, and there are a number of other areas that they've provided further clarification and allowed funds to be used. And so what has just come out again this week, and the guidance they brought forth, is another area that they've provided further guidance. And so I appreciate, one, council's willingness to come together at 7 o'clock on a Friday morning. And I understood that Jacob Bauer would not be available, and it's unfortunate he cannot be here. But thank you all for making the time to come and to prioritizing this discussion so that we can come back and revisit it. So Doug, I believe there were a couple of items that you had initially shared when you reviewed the new information. And thank you for sharing it with us.
So I can scroll down, I'll say if that's okay, right here. So originally, there were two primary concerns that finance had with this process. One was the
possibility and likelihood that there would be some sort of adverse finding from the single audit, meaning that we were required to follow contradict.
Treasury said we could presume that the public safety labor was substantially COVID-related. Then the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, said, well, you can go ahead and presume that, but you still have to prove that it was substantially COVID-19 and prove that it was substantially different in form than what you budgeted. And that was the guidance we had prior to Tuesday. So that was section 60, up on the screen I've got 69. There were sections 69, A and B. A and B are the two sections I referred to. You'll notice here that we go right from 69 now to 70. 69A and B are gone. 69 is just the basic statement saying, hey, we need to document what we're doing and track provide details for it. That's the first piece of challenge we had. The second was the urban renewal issue, whereby we are not allowed to do revenue replacement. I think later on I'll have Mark help address this more correctly on a legal perspective, but my understanding or my involvement with the urban renewal piece was that we were trying to find out the way that we could do this, or the way it could be done without creating what's called revenue replacement, which is strictly prohibited by CARES. Meaning I can't take CARES funds and use them to replace lost revenues. That's disallowed. You cannot do that. So the mechanism by which they came up with, that Mark spoke to earlier after a conversation, and that has been created, is that through the L2, and the L2 is the process by which we certify our budget to the county for them to begin the assessment process, or the application of the assessment process for the next year's taxes. So in prior years, the L2 had no mention or inclusion of the urban renewal. It was a separate separate activity. In this year's version of the L2, they have taken the urban renewal piece and separated it and saying that to avoid the concept of revenue replacement, the L2 will designate a portion of the current property tax assessment to pass urban renewal. It's just passed through us. That was their position on this. So what I'd like to specifically address right now is the change from 69 A and B to 70 A and B. So, and this is the guidance that came out on Tuesday. So it says basically in 70, the recipients must maintain and make available to Treasury or OIG upon request all documentation and financial records sufficient to establish compliance. That's very much same with the original 69. Now, A and B are the two critical aspects. Will a government have to demonstrate or substantiate that a public health or public safety employee's function duties were in fact substantially dedicated to mitigating the emergency? And the very first line there is no. The government will not have to demonstrate substantiate that a public health or public safety employee's function duties were substantially dedicated to mitigating the emergency. That was position one. If I had to demonstrate that and the auditors came back and disallowed my assumption, that would be a finding in our single audit. B, for payroll that was accounted for in the FY20 budget but was then presumed to be substantially dedicated to mitigating the emergency, will the government have to substantiate that a public health, public safety employee's function was a substantially different use? That's the concept we're operating on almost everybody else, is that if I submit payroll for reimbursement, it must be for a substantially different use. So, for instance, Chief Carpenter, when he stepped away from the position as chief of the fire department to become our manager of the emergency, that's a substantially different use, and I can submit that for reimbursement. And the answer here is no. The government will not have to substantiate that a budgeted public health or public safety employee's function was a substantially different use. So what that means from an audit accounting perspective is with the current guidance, I no longer have a bar preventing me from accepting this money and fearing that we'll have an adverse audit reaction. This means that I can do it on an accounting basis, and I'm speaking just from the finance side here. I want to be clear on that. From the finance side, I can accept the money without fear of an audit giving me an adverse reaction on our financials, thereby jeopardizing future federal funds. It will not do so, which is a positive factor in my side. Now, as for the urban renewal, I think Mark addressed this earlier, but maybe he can share his legal opinion, because that was the other side of the coin that I think some people were very, very worried about. Is it legally acceptable to leverage this new L2 process in order to...
I'm going to say, for the council and or those that are on Teams watching online, could you please mute your Teams so that we don't have the background noise? Thank you.
So, is the new L2 process substantially, does it substantially meet the requirements to avoid the definition of revenue replacement? And with the mayor's permission, maybe I'll ask Mark to go ahead and comment on that.
Good morning, Council and Mayor. With respect to the urban renewal part of this, my concern was the direct use of CARES Act funds and those passing through to the Urban Renewal Agency to replace lost tax revenue as a result of participation in the governor's program, which of course includes the tax credit component. It is not, in my opinion, problematic for the city to adjust its levy such that it collects from property taxes, general funds that can then be passed through. So as I understand from Doug, what's contemplated under the program is that you would not be passing through 100% of the CARES Act money as credit, but it would be a percentage that is less than that, measured by what is sufficient to collect general tax revenue, then to pass through to the Urban Renewal Agency and keep it whole. I do not have legal concerns if it's done through that second mechanism.
Thanks, Mark. So to be clear, there are other issues that might want to be addressed, Chair, but financial position, the accounting side is, I don't have a reason to say, no, you
Accept
may
those
not.
funds with fear of future reprisals. Now, what happens, there could be other, there will definitely be other thoughts and concerns about it, but Mayor, that's my understanding of the position now.
Doug, thank you very much. I would like to pause for just a moment and ask legal if you have any other comments that you would like to add to what Doug has just shared regarding legal concerns.
Thank you, Mayor. I do agree with Doug's analysis. One of the difficult things as we looked at the program was the disconnect between the guidance that was coming from Treasury and the guidance that was coming from OIG. In particular regarding the need to document the presumption. The updated guidance from the OIG's office eliminates that disconnect. And so, as the mayor indicated, I think it is very clear now that not just the governor's office, but the Treasury Department and OIG are all trying to align to say that the expenditure of CARES Act funds on police and fire payroll for this relevant 10-month period is an appropriate and proper use of the CARES Act funds. The concern that remains, and it's mitigated now based on this new information, the concern that remains, and again, I'm looking from a risk standpoint, is the black letter language of the CARES Act itself is a little bit different from the guidance. And I think that there is some truth in what the mayor says, certainly about, we look to those federal agencies charged with implementation of the CARES Act for guidance on how to apply it. And I do think that it's certainly clear now that OIG and Treasury are both on the same page with respect to this expenditure of funds. So the concerns that I shared with you earlier are not 100% alleviated, and maybe that's because I'm the attorney and conservative about risk, but it certainly helps. It certainly clarifies some of the concern that I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think just one of the last things I want to say is that in checking to see what cities are participating, the ones that we know are not participating are Caldwell, Emmett, and Canyon County that have reconfirmed their positions. The ones that I've heard that are participating are Ada County, Boise, Meridian, Eagle, Star, Garden City, Pocatello, Twin Falls, Idaho Falls, Parma, Sandpoint, Coeur d'Alene, McCall, Horseshoe Bend, and then many other smaller cities that I don't have across the state. So with that, based upon the new information that has come forward, and you've had the opportunity to listen to Legal and to Doug Racine, and as Mark mentioned, I do feel, based on the research that I did and the conversations I've had, that the Treasury guidance and the OIG is a clarification of the CARES Act, just as takes place regularly in any legislative body. And so that relieved my concerns. So with that, I think I'll leave it to the council for discussion.
Mayor, I just have one question. The amount of money, and I really, even though I voted to accept this last time, of course, I will vote again to accept it, even with this further less risk. Originally, I was hearing 11.1 million. And then what I appreciated, with my understanding, and whether it was correct or not, was we were taking away close to 1.8 or whatever million away because of already using
That's correct.
that money.
We started at 11.181
Right.
million.
So I guess what my question is what are we expecting if we do vote yes on this, as far as accepting? What would our amount be the same as we were voting on last council meeting, or would it be back to that 11.1?
The same as we voted, $9.2 million.
Okay, thanks.
The one thing I can say is that we're being very careful that we do not and did not submit to the state. I believe the reallocation back is about 42%. Hopefully that's correct. We reduced, as you said, the amount that we submitted, and we've been very careful to ensure that the only things being submitted are strictly first responders, public safety. We could actually submit more, and that's one area that I feel comfortable with, that we could submit more, but we're trying to be very careful to follow the guidance as provided and not to go beyond from an integrity standpoint. Yeah.
Mayor Klein?
Yes.
So Doug, so let's get this perfectly clear, is that this money coming in from the government, from the CARES, is only specifically for payroll?
For two specific payroll and benefits for public safety only, fire and police, nothing else.
So it depends on how you designate which position or which occupation or that's related to COVID can this money go to?
You mean within the fire and police?
Right.
Uh,
For example, Kristen, right? Isn't Kristen doing this?
She is not a first responder, so this is only dedicated to
okay.
first responders, and we've also pulled out evidence, investigators, I think
criminalists and so forth, any administrative function that was not directly serving the COVID-19. We left in people like trainers, because trainers were training the firefighters and the police how to deal with COVID-19, so I left those in. But I took out the administrative portion, and I think there's 19 or so, 27 or so investigators that are not just the rank and file police, but they're the investigators of acts of crime after. So those were removed. We removed Chief Carpenter because his payroll will be submitted separately. And we came up with about 4 or 5 million less payroll to submit.
Does this include employing other people specifically for the COVID?
No,
Okay.
no.
Mayor, just one clarification. I may have dreamt this, because I do dream a lot of things. I thought there was something mentioned also besides police and fire of HR. Was that just something I just dreamt?
Not for this aspect, no.
Okay.
No, we
thought that's something I read.
did submit a request through CFAC for the approval of a temporary staff to work with HR to support COVID-19 issues, but that was a separate CFAC request.
So Mayor Kling, if I could follow up. So what's the benefit to the taxpayers?
Okay. The benefit, I think Steve could probably speak more accurately to this than I could, and I we're welcome to ask him, but there are three groups of taxpayers, correctly? There's the residential, there's commercial, and then there's ag. In terms of raw dollars, the residential will get the lion's share of the money. In terms of percentage, I think a greater percentage goes a little bit to the commercial and ag. There are two forces at play here. One is the increase in valuation of the homes that are taking place. And I believe, as we've talked, that's about 20% this year in terms of overall property valuation. Steve, is that 20% overall for the city of Nampa? So if you take and then apply a 22, 23 plus percentage reduction from the $9.2 million, you'll see a little bit of a credit, but what'll be harder to see, but will be there, is the avoidance. You know, I'm big into this avoidance issue, cost avoidance. You'll avoid a tax increase for this year. Keep in mind, that will come back in 2 years, but for this year, you'll avoid that, and you'll get a small credit on the residential side. I think the credit average, I think it might have been, for a $250,000 home, I think it might have been about $163, something like that, in that bracket.
So, so eventually, will our budget that's already set, will this money help our budget? Will it decrease our budget?
It technically does not change our budget. It changes the funding source to meet our existing budget. So instead of levying for that $9.2 million, we'll take that out of our levy and we'll replace it with money from the state.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
So Mayor, just clarification, maybe Steve, thanks for being here, maybe this is yours. So if we did not take, I realize the 20% increase as far as an appraisal, you know, but if it was not taking, how much would it affect the average taxpayer, say with a $250,000 home? Any idea, just a rough estimate?
I think the numbers that Steve and I went through, I think it was about $140 to $160 is what the
That's what
credit
you're
would be. Yeah,
speaking of.
that's what I'm speaking
So
of.
we
right.
are saving this year with that type of
Yes.
home, $160.
Right.
Okay. And I realize there'll be a little shock next year, but
Right.
we're still helping them out.
You're helping them out this year. So one of two things will happen.
Wouldn't have had to pay that much more, plus next year, whatever the appraisal or whatever it is. So we are saving them. Bottom line is, we are saving the taxpayer currently this year about that amount if we accept it.
It may, and this would be a discussion topic for the mayor and the council, is it may also be advantageous if you choose to move forward to provide some sort of public information fact on exactly what this does to an individual's taxes, because I'm not sure the L2 or the assessment's going to say it, but if you choose to accept it, it may be beneficial to
I
come
think
with
that's
clarity.
important, Mayor. That's my opinion.
Mayor.
Yes.
And we don't know what the legislature may do with property taxes.
We have absolutely no idea, but I know that everybody involved on both parties, both sides, are looking for some type of property tax reform. Something will get traction, we just don't know what it looks like.
Follow up? So I struggled with this a little bit the first time because I don't think there is any part of our lives that have not been substantially impacted by COVID. I think it would be a stretch to say they have not. But the guidance just seemed to be pretty gray. I feel a lot more comfortable with this new guidance. And Councilman Bruner, I think it's worth saving our taxpayers $12 a month. I know for some that might not seem like a lot, but we've had people come before us who don't have $10 for their utility bill.
Yep.
And for those folks, it will make a substantial difference. So I appreciate this new guidance. It makes me feel a lot better. And it also makes me wonder, musings, did they change it to encourage more people to participate? Because it's really interesting that we've been going through this and people have been sort of, I'm not sure.
Well, I think it's a little broader than just our issue, because this is a national effort.
Right.
And it's addressing a national concern, what happens to be part of our concern, but they're not really saying, let's bring up the issue in Boise, Idaho.
No,
They're-
but broadly,
yeah, right.
people may be having the same concerns we did with how the money would be used.
Now,
I appreciate that.
there are two ways of looking at it in reality. There's a way of looking at it saying, hey, they're trying to jerry-rig the instructions so that you can get to a point where you can justify it, or you can look at it the other way saying they're actually trying to provide clarity for the most accurate use of the funds. And those are the two options with which one can consider this move.
And I have to say, I believe that this is clarity, because anytime a piece of legislation, and I visited with some of our legislators about this, when you propose legislation, it is a standard process that you've got to have the rules to help clarify what your intent is. And my understanding, based on the discussions I just had in the last 2 days, is that Treasury was a part of guiding the language for the CARES Act. But once you do it, then you realize, what, we didn't clarify, and that additional clarity was needed. So that's what my understanding is that additional clarity was needed, and they've provided the clarity that people have asked. One thing I do want to say is that a number of states have not had any dollars to pass down to local municipalities to help support the expenses that they've had due to COVID. Because we have a well-managed state government, our state has been able to share and has shared with local municipalities funds, which we have been the recipient of in other ways to offset the cost of and the impact of COVID, of which we greatly appreciate that. And while this has been a little bit difficult, it's taken a tremendous amount of time from counties and cities all across the state of Idaho trying to figure it out. It's been very difficult. The intent was a positive intent, and I do appreciate that positive intent in what the goal was with it. So, but at that, it is up to the council in what you would like to see. I'd like to pause for just a second and go to those on Teams, to Randy Haverfield and Sandy Levi, to ask if you have any questions or comments that you would like to make.
Sandy, do you have any comments first? If not, I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and speak then. Did Sandy come on?
Go ahead, I'll wait for you.
Oh, okay. Mayor Kling, fellow council, my concerns are philosophical in nature. These are still dollars that are either tax dollars, or it's just money that's being printed someplace and thrown into our communities, which means we're going to be facing even more inflation, and our national debt's going to continue to rise. I think from a standpoint of accepting the dollars, when by and large, a lot of people won't even see this because it's just built into their mortgage, what they pay each month through escrow. So $160 over a year's time for a $250,000 home is probably not even going to be noticed. But, it is what it is. Like Gene mentioned, $12 a month is significant to some and nothing to others. But my concern still remains that a couple of things. One, where's this money coming from? If it's just being printed someplace and thrown into our economies with the intent that, we can spend it and keep things going, I think the payroll protection loan that was put out, other avenues that have already been provided for COVID relief for the general public and for businesses has already taken place, and this is above and beyond. I don't think anything's really changed from the position that I had before, that we still have to substantiate. Has the labor force been substantially affected by this? Or emergency providers, are they, is the job that they have been providing that drastically altered, that it took $9 million worth of funds to offset the changes in how things are being done? I don't know. You've said certain areas of our law enforcement and fire protection, have been pulled out of this. Rank and file officers, they haven't, nobody's been laid off that I'm aware of. So have their payrolls been adjusted? Or is it just that we're taking dollars to pay for what's already was budgeted in our fiscal year 21 budget? So I'm not convinced that things have changed that much, other than there's been some statements made by through the governor's office that we don't have to provide as much if we're held accountable. Now in November, if the election is such that we have a democratic switch in our policies, this could come back and it could be retroactive, and then we're in the position where we're having to validate, substantiate, and maybe even return the dollars given to us. That risk is still there. So, again, my concern is philosophical. I know that it's nice to be able to pass through, if this is truly just a gift given by the government to our taxpayers, so be it. But, it seems likely that these are still tax dollars that either we're going to have to pay back or our children and grandchildren are going to have to pay back because our national debt keeps rising. That's just a philosophical concern.
Thank you, Randy. Sandy?
Thank you, Councilman Haverfield. You have summed up exactly what I say. I'll hear you all from repeating it again.
Mayor Kling,
Yes.
if I could follow. Okay, so he brought up a very important part in this whole concept of taking this money. First of all, how do we have to pay this? Would we have to pay this back? Because you don't get anything for free, I think. But and how will it, if we do pay it back, how will it affect our tax rate?
Well, and Mark can speak to this if I state this incorrectly, but the prime recipient is the state. They're the ones that would be responsible for repaying the value if that was overturned. However, it doesn't preclude somebody from at some point in time trying to reach all the way down the municipalities, but the prime recipient bears the burden of the repayment, is my understanding.
Okay, so I just opened up a whole can of worms, I think. So could the state, and I should say the legislator, vote, and this is hypothetical, Mayor, I know, I'm just saying out loud, could they increase their budget, which is our taxes, to repay that amount? Would we fit the burden, I guess, as taxpayers?
Well, if it came to repaying this, they would have two options. One, to pull from reserves, or, well, actually three options: pull from reserves, cut other programs, or to raise taxes. Those are three basic options they would have to repay it. The same ones that we would have to repay. If we had to repay it, we would have to cut growth. We would have to stop all growth for at least 1 year and use the full 3% and use all of our new construction monies. And then that wouldn't be enough. That would take 2 years of that to actually repay it, if that was the course of action.
Okay. So, however, presently, we don't know that there will be a repayment policy yet, right?
No, it seems less likely now with the guidance that has been delivered, but it's hard to predict the future.
Yeah, right.
Well, for clarity, this is a grant with no repayment.
Okay.
The only reason there would be a repayment is if there were a change in leadership. However, I've asked the question, and I visited a number of times with the governor's office on this, and they have assured me that they have been in conversations with the U.S. Treasury. They feel fully confident about the program that they have laid out, and the governor has given his word. Now, you recognize that if an audit happens when someone's no longer in office, it becomes a legislative issue. But this is a grant. It is not going to have to be repaid unless there were a change at the federal level. But what I have been told is that the likelihood, the decision to move forward with the CARES Act and the funding was approved through the House and the Senate, both bodies. It wasn't a presidential. So both parties are the ones that have agreed upon the CARES Act.
I see.
And if we don't take the dollars, they're going to go back into the state to be allocated someplace else. If those dollars aren't used, they'll go back to the federal government to be allocated someplace else. It isn't like it's going to reduce our debt. If we don't use the money, it's going to go someplace else to some other need versus to our local citizens.
So just one final comment. And I agree with Councilman Haverfield's assessment that, free money comes with strings somewhere along the line. But Also keep in mind, in fullness of discussion, that if we were to attempt a tax increase of 9.2 million, the hue and outcry would be long-lasting and very well deserved. So while we really couldn't increase taxes by 9.2 because of the impact per household, I mean, the opposite seems to apply, that when we cut the taxes, that it would be a welcome benefit, at least this year. Now, next year, obviously, there's a recovery, but it works both ways.
And Mayor, just it probably doesn't need to be said, and I appreciate also Councilman Haverfield's comments and the philosophy, because we just like to spend money around this country anymore. And but as far as the, I am not at all concerned whether if a Democratic Party becomes in office in November, if anything, they're going to give more money out. I mean, as far as what they've been trying to do, as far as increasing the CARES Act, it's 3 times as much as what the Republicans wanted to do, and they want to help out municipalities and states that are not fiscally responsible. So I do not have that concern as far as if there's a change in office as far as coming November.
And I do want to say, just to make sure it's clear, I appreciate Randy's comments regarding debt, because our debt's ridiculous, and it's quite unfortunate, and it's very, very concerning. And it would be my vote that no additional CARES money gets allocated at the federal level. I think they've allocated substantially, and they don't need to allocate anymore, because it's nothing but taxes, right, that we're going to have to cover. But that said, if we don't use this, I don't anticipate it going back and reducing anything. It's going to be reallocated to someone else and for some other cause. So what's the will of the council?
Mayor, I'm just going to make the motion. I'm going to make it a real simple motion that we determine to go ahead and change our position, and that we go ahead and accept the Governor's Public Safety Initiative as reported.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we go ahead, and I think it was based on the additional information and the guidance we've received that we're going to change our position from last time and
Well,
receive the
not
funds.
personally, but as a
Not
council,
personally.
yes.
Okay, so, yes.
Just as a reminder, Canyon County and the city of Caldwell neither saw the same benefit that Darrell and Jean are speaking about. Nothing was really spoken to as far as their reasoning. In the past, in our past discussion, it was brought forward what their reasoning was. I had a chance to talk a little bit with one of the commissioners last night. Again, the same concerns are being held that they had before, same concerns that I had before, and I won't be supporting this motion.
Is there any other discussion? Okay,
Seeing none, roll call. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Levi?
No.
Haverfield?
No.
Mucci?
Yes.
Brunner?
Yes.
Okay, well, that concludes our meeting. This was the only action item that we have, and I would stand for a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mayor.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.